All right, folks, good morning. Again, I'm Jeff Fenson. I think I met most of you guys here. And again, I'm happy to be here at this inaugural event. This is quite wonderful to be here. And what I'm going to do is give you a high-level perspective of DDoS from a CISO's perspective. Again, I know Phil's here, another healthcare CISO. This won't really dig down into that too much, but I have to tell you, obviously, healthcare in the U.S. is the most attacked industry, right? Number one attacked industry. Have you been watching the news? Change Health is in the news. I think Ascension is in the news. And there's been a lot of stuff that's been happening on the Hill as it relates to cybersecurity. So with that being said, how do I work this thing? Is it working here? Did we test it? I might have to get you to do the next slide. Okay. I tested it. Can I just get you to do the next slide? All right, so we're gonna go back down memory lane here. Show of hands, we're gonna make this interactive. Who remembers the Estonia DDoS? Right? Not many hands, but that kind of set the stage, as you see here, in 2007. That's when Carl and I met. You didn't have anything to do with that, did you? So we'll see what happens. Some of the same players are still out there, right? We talk about geopolitical landscape, what happens, and sure enough, here we go. We have Russia. What they did to Estonia. Estonia back in 2007 was, I'll say, way ahead of the curve from the digital world. They pretty much had everything online. And so what the Russians did, they actually DDoSed them for about 3 weeks. Took pretty much everything offline. So they were using a digital presence for everything, in banking, shopping. But this kind of set the stage, and as you'll see here, for 3 weeks, they launched this attack. And it's known now as one of the first nation-state attacks on a country from a DDoS perspective. How much has changed since then? As we go back down memory lane, let's look at, this has been going on quite some time. So as you look at Corero, you're right in the middle of that fight right now, right? You've been in that fight for 10 years solid, but that fight still continues. So we look at what's going on here. Again, you look at here what happened, two of their largest banks, news organizations, governmental organizations. That's still happening, folks. That is still happening. So, as we look at DDoS and what happened here, it is still very relevant to what's going on. Next slide, please. So type of attacks. Not that I need to let this audience know the type of attacks, but you hear a lot about the volumetric attacks. And I look like my slide is a little bit off there, but we all know what that is. But as you look at the application layer attacks, protocol, send flood attacks, and I think, Sean, you were talking about a lot of the DNS that you guys are seeing, right? So we hear a lot about the volumetric, but here we go again with the DDoS, right? And that would be categorized as application layer, I believe. So all of these things here need to be taken to full focus, and we need to be laser focused on what's happening. Because again, we hear a lot about ransomware. Ransomware, again, number one attacked industry, healthcare. They're dealing with a lot, right? We're dealing with a lot, but as you'll see later on, these ransomware attacks can be the initial, what we call probing, can happen from a DDoS attack, right? So they have multiple ways of getting in. So here we are, again, the types. I'll let it stay up there a little bit, but you guys should be familiar with that. Next slide, please. So hospitals and other industries. You look at what's happening. Here, there's a breakdown, and you look at what's going on here. Hospitals right now account for 26%, big pharma, 31%. So again, this is how we look at the landscape, and the other industries certainly are susceptible to these things. But as you look at the landscape, and again, representing healthcare right now, it is a problem. And it is also a problem that a lot of healthcare organizations do not take account for. They don't have DDoS protection. They need it clearly, but they're not moving there. But there's help that's on the way, at least from a U.S. government perspective. And I think there were some talks yesterday on the last chat there, the panel. Sean alluded to a few things that's needed. And again, help is on the way because or at least what's happening right now in the U.S. There's a lot of laser focus from this current administration where they're giving a lot of guidance, a lot of recommendations, and there's a lot of laws that are coming down that these organizations have to meet the minimum standards. And you will see later on there's specific guidance that has been given about DDoS attacks. Next slide. So I alluded to this here, CISA, FBI, and the ISAC. So the ISACs are, I'll say, presidential directives. They stand for Information Sharing Analysis Centers. The CISA is the, I'll say, the premier organization right now in the U.S., which stands for the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, I believe. And of course, we all know about the FBI. So they put out this joint bulletin here talking about the threats to the healthcare sector. And this is what basically happened here. You see all these number of attacks that have been orchestrated against healthcare organizations. And that bullet there, 55% were healthcare systems, at least one hospital, and lone hospitals level 1 trauma centers. So a little history about level 1 trauma centers. These are the best of breed. These treat the most critical care patients in the nation. And the system I came from had BenTob. BenTob is a level 1 trauma center, and it is world known across the globe. We actually train U.S. military, and we also are a training organization for the future physicians out there. So my system certainly paid attention to all of these things, and as Carl mentioned before, we've had a long relationship over the years, and we certainly had DDoS protection to actually forecast what was going on. But again, these things are pretty important. Healthcare, again, availability is everything. So if the network is not available, obviously that impacts patient care and patient safety, right? So we say cybersecurity is a patient safety issue. Ransomware is not the only threat that's out there. Again, we're talking about DDoS here, and this is something that we were fully aware of and in tune with, and actually there was a high visibility and awareness to our organization to be aware of these things, but this is something that keeps coming down. And again, in healthcare, if the systems are not available, you have to go back to what I call the early stages of treating patients. No medical devices, right, that are working on the network. All of the telemetry is now digital, pretty much. And what healthcare organizations have to do is go down to their downtime procedures. And downtime procedures can actually impact lives. When the systems are not available, you also have to divert patients, which can also be a life safety issue, because now all of a sudden you need critical care, they have to divert you to another organization. You may actually expire on the way to the other organization. So again, these are dire issues in healthcare, but again, it touches all other industries as well.
Jeff, to just pull on that string just for 1 second, and I don't mean to interrupt your flow.
No worries.
With the rise of HRMs and the SaaS models, and the fact that you just talked about going through down procedure, there's not a lot of paper. Right?
Correct.
So in regards to patient histories and some of the health management systems, right, that are in a SaaS-based platform, are more hospitals leaning toward that way? Do they still have on-prem solutions, or are they using more cloud-based or third parties? What does that look like, the risks and the threats that y'all face there?
That's a great question, great comments there. It's a mixed model, I will tell you that. Now, when we talk about the electronic health records, EMRs, there's one system called Epic, and they are the 800-pound gorilla. They pretty much control the market now, and they have a desire for most of their customers to move to cloud. So to your point, clearly that's a single point of failure, if you will. So it is a concern. Now, as you talked about those downtime procedures, there's not a lot of paper. And the guidance that has been given is when a hospital system has been hit with ransomware, the expectation is to be down for 4 weeks. 4 weeks. That means prepare to take care of your patients with no electronic medical record, to do all of your prescriptions, all of the running, everything that you would see when you go to a hospital now, all the telemetry that you're hooked up to, that may not be available if it's on the network, okay? So again, Sean, to what you said, who has enough paper for 4 weeks? So when we talk about downtime procedures and resiliency, a lot of the hospitals don't practice that. Again, you can look at it in the news right now on Google Ascension. You can look at what's happening right there. They had 140 facilities that have been taken offline due to, they believe it was Black Basta right now that has hit their system. So dire straits when it comes to healthcare. Next slide. KillNet, again, there was a great conversation yesterday. I was like, did Sean look at my slide deck here? So KillNet obviously is a pro-Russian hacking group here. You can see what's up there. And they launched several attacks, DDoS attacks against healthcare organizations. Obviously, they were supporters of Russia. Geopolitical landscape, again, we talked a lot about that. That actually is real, folks. It is very real. So they launched a lot of DDoS attacks against hospitals. Again, you see it, 55% were hospitals. Again, there was an alert to the healthcare and public health sectors from the FBI and CISO. Put everybody on alert. Certainly, I think this happened back in February of last year, and it was very real. There were about 93 hospitals in Texas alone that were susceptible to this, that was reported. Luckily, it didn't cause any grave damage to organizations, but the threat is very real. So again, I keep highlighting how healthcare is one of the most attacked industries. It is very real. All of the numbers are there, and guess what? It's not going away. It's not going away. Since 2015, healthcare has clearly been under attack. Who remembers the Anthem breach? Anybody remember Anthem? All right, so in that Anthem breach, there were about 80 million records compromised. That year alone, there was 112 million records in the U.S. that were compromised. Guess what last year did? There were about 130 million records last year. So the problem is not going away. It's just getting greater. So again, just highlight some of the hospitals that suffered some challenges there. About 93 were in Texas alone. But again, KillNet, the threat is very real. And you'll see how the U.S. has adjusted some of its policies and guidance to organizations from this KillNet issue. Next slide. Botnets, again, the panel yesterday was great. There were botnets mentioned yesterday, so again, I'm like, did they look at my slide deck? So the botnets, everybody knows what they are. Actually, these botnets are used to launch these DDoS attacks, right? Compromise systems, multiple systems, contribute to that distributed denial of service. So as you see here, China has now launched a botnet as a service. It's not just China, but a lot of organizations are doing this. So this is where we talk about the threat intelligence. I know Corero is doing a lot of threat intel. I would tell people, and don't steal this, but threat intelligence is business intelligence. That's how I've used it. Giving information like this to the senior leaders allows them to make informed business decisions. This also articulates the risk, but as we look from a security perspective to talk the business language, you have to be able to translate this and say, this is what this really means. So the awareness goes a long way. That situational awareness, as understanding this type of information, allows you to inform the senior leaders, allows them to get a risk profile, and allows them to understand why you need to have true business resiliency. You see here what happened here? Malicious actors develop botnets that can bypass a lot of solutions. I think some of the partners were in the news where there were malformed packets that could get through the fences. So Corero, you got some great tech, your R&D shop. I know you're doing it, but stay, I'll say, persistent in making sure your code doesn't have any holes in it, that you're pen testing and you have people that's trying to break your code as you're developing this code, because they don't stop. Again, we talked about why our industry is losing, because we don't share information quickly enough. They do. They share this information. That dark web, the dark net, all of those things they share. And you can pay to get this information. So it's very real. This is what's happening, and here we go again. We talked about DNS. DNS is down there again as we talk about these different attacks and what's happening across the industry. Next slide. All right, we're in the 2024, and guess what? As I started, it has not gone away. You see this Cloudflare, sorry, but you get information from these folks here. You see what happened, 4.5 billion DDoS attacks in the first 3 months of the year. I believe, Carl, you even put this out on the Corero page. So information, folks, is very powerful, right? As you understand the dynamics of what's happening, it allows you to adapt your controls, and what we say, adapt and overcome. Because if you're not aware of the threats that are out there, how are you going to get in front of them? It's difficult to stay even in lockstep, but having this awareness and understanding the threat landscape allows you to adapt your controls, allows organizations to trust that you're out there aware, and allows for early warning of what's happening. So again, you look at just 2024 alone, it's absolutely amazing that as we look at how cyber has evolved over the years, and we're actually still in the same place almost, right? It's like we're spinning our wheels, we're stuck in the mud. We have all of this technology, and the attacks just keep coming over and over again, and they're similar attacks to what's been around for multiple years here. Next slide. Again, as we talk about 2024, France and Italy here. We talked about what happened in Estonia, but we're still seeing that the governmental entities are being breached. They're being rendered unavailable. Their websites are down. They can't provide services. And as I talk about from a healthcare perspective, that's gloom and doom if you can't provide the services. If people can't communicate, as we look at from a warfighting perspective, if I disrupt your communications, how are you going to stop anything? No one can truly communicate. So even in your organizations that are not healthcare, you need to come up with those resiliency plans and talk about what you need to do. Incident response. Show of hands, let's be interactive. How many organizations have an incident response plan? All right. How often is it tested? Every year? Twice a year. Very good. Most organizations don't even have an IR plan. They don't have one. And I know, Corero, you guys provide those services as well? Okay. Don't want to steal your thunder. So this is very important. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So those IR plans are extremely important to have. And again, if you look at these countries right here that's being hit, clearly they're not prepared. We don't know what they're doing, but certainly if you reach out, there's opportunities to, again, deploy this technology, build stronger relationships across the globe. Next slide. Okay, here we go. It was talked about yesterday that the government is not doing enough. I will tell you again, this current administration in the U.S., they've done quite a bit on cybersecurity. This is specific guidance from CISA, FBI, and the multiple state information sharing analysis center about DDoS attacks. About DDoS attacks. The guidance now, we understand what guidance is. It's not, mandatory, it's not a requirement, it's a guidance. But if you look how impactful this came out in October of 2022, okay? Again, this was talking about the federal government in the U.S., state, local, tribal, and territorial areas. And they actually did a really good job of issuing this guidance, okay? And again, it came out in October 2022. They just updated it in March of this year. So they're still focused on this. They haven't let it go, right? It took them a little while to come up with this guidance, but again, CISA, FBI, they are the premier organizations right now to give a lot of guidance to organizations. They partner with a lot of security vendors to actually recommend even some of the technology that's out there. But again, as they updated this, we'll talk again about those types in there. We covered it earlier, metric, protocol, and application layer. What came out in March was they drilled down into those areas that give you more information about these attacks, and we all know in the room it doesn't have to be just one at a time, right? You can have a mix of these type of attacks, and how are you going to respond when there's a mix of these types of attacks? Next slide. All right, folks, as I close out, DDoS is here to stay, right? It is here to stay. Carl mentioned it in his keynote opening there about the market that's out there and what the projection is. But again, it is here to stay. As we look back in 2023, 13 plus million targeted attacks on organizations across the globe. 13 plus million targeted attacks. And as we look at DDoS, and it's here to stay, is a rise of the IoT. And in healthcare, Phil can validate this, is the IOMT, Internet of Medical Things. It is here to stay. So that's going to come. And again, in my industry right now, that's gloom and doom if it's not available. And in most organizations, that's how you survive. It needs to be available, right? You need to certainly have your networks available. And as we talked before, the DDoS attacks can just be a precursor to more things to come. More things to come. It can actually start happening before ransomware attack is launched. So my question again yesterday to Ash, what are you going to do? Are you going to expand your portfolio? Looking at things like this, what does this mean to an organization when you see a certain type of DDoS attack? Is that kind of the beginning of where they're going to launch ransomware? Is this group known to actually use those type of techniques before they launch ransomware? EJ, you have a question?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. You're talking about multi-threaded or multi-vector attacks. Seems as though people still just look at this as a network issue.
Say again?
Seems as though, my opinion is, people still look at this as just a network issue.
Absolutely.
I don't see enough security, engagement, involvement with the recognition of what multi-vector actually means and the threat that it poses to an environment.
I totally agree with you.
So, what are you doing about it?
Well, I think when you talk about that, and again, a great comment and question, I think a lot of the messaging can be adapted to what's going on in the threat landscape. Because again, as you said, I think it's taken from a network perspective. Of course, that's the core, right? You have to use the network. But when you talk about those multi-pronged attack vectors, certainly the messaging needs to be there. So if you're seeing that now, perhaps that's something that Corero can start messaging differently. Because again, as we see, it is being used to actually look over here while I go over here and attack your systems. So this is something that's evolving.
So Jeff, what I would say to that point, and also to your point, is that this comes down to visibility. It is a network issue, but if we're talking about layer 3 and layer 4, the reason why it's network-based is because it's network focused, it's not a conversation. Typically, when you look at a layer 7 attack, that's an application layer. So you've got an application team that's looking at that. And typically, that's a web application firewall, which you don't necessarily have visibility to. So now if I'm looking holistically across an enterprise, I'm now looking at DNS, I'm now looking at layer 3, layer 4, and I'm also looking at layer 7, and I'm also looking at behavioral analysis on the website.
Right.
All four of those things combined can be the same campaign, can be different penetration scenarios from the same threat actors, or they can be different.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that, again, it's here to stay, but it's more and more complicated, right?
Right.
If you look at visibility, you can control back to that
Right. Yeah.
I look at what we're doing, Corero. I think we're the strategic edge. I think we're the very first point where you can identify a problem.
Where you deploy. With the strategic edge, where you deploy. Visibility is I have to have a sensor to see the actual traffic. You don't see layer 7.
80% of DDoS is visibility.
Yeah. So the answer is you are strategic as it relates to where you're actually deployed. But you can't be strategic on something you can't see. So if you're not deployed in the vector, you can't provide insight.
So I think it goes back to Paul's presentation yesterday, where they've got the correlation and the aggregation of traffic, events, be able to tie together.
Right, but in Paul's network, it's a proprietary owned network that has fiber connectivity where you're actually deployed in every node throughout his network. And he has 4 or 5 different solutions that are looking at layer 7, as well as DNS, and he's funneling that up into a proprietary-based elastic solution that provides visibility and orchestration. So that's a unique use case. So in that scenario, yes, but you're still reporting against layer 3, layer 4 DNS, right? So holistically in his environment, if I've got SaaS, PaaS, I've got IaaS, I've got my own proprietary cloud. And again, Akamai's got a slew of technology. I don't sit everywhere, and I can't report against everything. My point is that in order to solve that problem, you need 10 or 15 solutions, of which I have 3 or 4, you have 3 or 4, and there's a need for another 5 or 6 problem that he has on that screen. That's the only point I'm saying.
You know, one of the things that I think is the biggest challenge in the space is that it's who owns the problem, right?
Yes.
So in your organization, Kevin, let's suppose the hospital is down. Where does that bouncing ball eventually land for ownership?
That goes to senior leadership, right?
But who specifically? Of course you can say the CEO, but I'm saying
Right.
who really owns that ball in your organization? And let me ask you to even further with you, because I know that you have an amazing amount of people around you that you talk to CISO-wise. I guess really what I'm asking, do CISOs either take responsibility or feel like they own this problem?
We take responsibility, but we don't own the problem, right?
Don't you think there's a fundamental issue with that?
Well, the challenge is when it comes from a business perspective, again, some of the security concerns may fall second tier, third tier to the business objectives, right? So when it comes to a hospital system being down, I may have responsibility of being able to tell you what's going on, but the COO is the one that's responsible for saying, okay, who makes the call to divert the patients? You know, who announced to the media that we're down? And there's in Texas, there's an organization that we have to notify when we go on diversion. So they own all that. We sit back in the shadows at that point. We help articulate how long we think the system's going to be down, how long it's going to take us to recover, but they actually own that issue, and we march at their drumbeat. If they tell us, hey, this EMR is down, we say, okay, now we need to go to what we call our shadow systems. The shadow systems last a certain amount of time where they can still actually treat the patients, but it's no real-time data that's coming through. But again, I don't think, the CISOs clearly don't own that challenge. We're responsible, but we don't own it.
Jeff, to ask Carl's question a different way, I think you were the one that said that in the room yesterday, or somebody did, that it's easy to get people to move when there's an attack or somebody's down. How can we collectively use the data from what we've experienced to try to get people in a better security posture by spending money ahead of time? It's
Right.
so much easier to move
Right.
forward in peacetime than it is, under duress and attack. So do you have any advice for me on how we can better convince people or provide better arguments? What do you think it takes for us to help move the needle in the real world?
Well, here's what I've used to be successful. And again, I alluded to it earlier when I talked about using threat intelligence for business intelligence. So I would give a 30-minute stand-up to my CEO and senior leadership. And while we would be talking about technical things from a threat perspective, we correlated that to the business perspective. Here's what's happening in the industry. Here's what could happen here, and here's what we need to do to move forward, right, to mitigate these risks. And that was very successful. In fact, it was so successful that a lot of times the CEO at the end of that meeting would drive conversations to what he didn't want to see and what he wanted to get out in front of, right? So he would see it and say, okay, here's what we need to do, especially when it came to key initiatives. If we had partnerships and my team was doing a risk assessment, he would say, okay, let's prioritize this, let's take this offline and talk about the concerns that we have, especially from a regulatory perspective, right? Compliance, that was talked about. I know Paul mentioned that yesterday in his briefing. The compliance and regulatory complexity was always a concern, but again, cyber drove that in a way from using our threat intel for business intelligence to make those informed decisions. So I would say how to get out in front of it is great. We're all cyber people in here, but again, you hear a lot about cyber can't translate to the business, but you can use threat intelligence and all your technical speaks to correlate to what's concerning from a strategic standpoint to the organization, and they get it. The decision makers get it when you hit them with risk, and here's a project, and here's a concern that we have going on, and here how this can impact the bottom line here for our organization.
One of the things that I have done in the past is almost life cycle of an attack. but you've got to almost soften it a little bit.
Yes.
Because otherwise they think you're just trying to scaremonger them.
Bingo.
As a worst case scenario.
Right.
And you almost tone it down and walk through the life cycle and what the end point,
Right.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you have to soften that language too, right? Yeah, you can't use all these terms and all our technical terms. You have to use those business language to understand. And talk about the risk, right? You talk about the risk more than the cyber threat.
It's all about risk.
And they understand risk, right?
And they will get that.
Absolutely.
And we're just saying, risk isn't good or bad, just how much is acceptable to you.
Absolutely.
This is how you measure it.
Absolutely. Daniel, you have something?
So what I've seen, now maybe it's because it's Pennsylvania and Crozier was out for 4 months, literally 4 months. And so the hospitals, the boards, I mean, to be fair, I have more than one hospital system where CISO has oversight into networking. They did what we all do, and they sent the networking team, here's your CVEs, fix them.
Right.
The networking team took the report and threw it in the corner.
Yeah.
Because it's too difficult to know which CVEs are to fix.
Yeah.
And security was the management of the configurations now. They own it, which, and I've seen this happen to hospital systems. So,
Wow.
You know what's amazing about that too, Daniel?
So sorry, just to make sure, so you're saying the security teams are essentially
very elevated.
They just threw it out, right?
They like the budget signs, I mean, has anyone done DDoS testing? Have you seen how much the DDoS testing tools cost? More than the DDoS. And I have more than one hospital who've gone and bought this because the board told them they had to, and I'm looking at something like this makes.
The board told them?
This
It's
makes
interesting.
no sense.
Yeah, that's very
Like,
interesting.
the amount of money you're spending to test something that you don't even have the right thing yet.
Well, again, in healthcare, like a lot of industries, the board isn't, they have it on their radar, and as you probably saw from the SEC in the States, they were going to mandate a few things with cybersecurity and have someone on the board, but they turned it around and said, we would give you guidance. So there is some more teeth coming, right? But as I've seen in my experience, a lot of the board members don't truly understand cybersecurity. You may have a few that can truly advocate it, but it's all about the messaging. And to your point there, Daniel, when you mentioned that the InfoSec team just threw something over the fence, we have to collaborate, right? And you have to give them actionable vulnerability CVEs that's there. So my team, what we would do is we wouldn't just throw a report over to the IT team to patch. We would actually have validation there, right? We wouldn't just run a vulnerability report and send it over. We would actually test these things. We would do credential scans and make sure it was present before we actually send a report over for them to remediate those things. So that's a problem too, chasing your tail with vulnerabilities that may or may not even exist.
The Crozier example, though, there's two things that came to mind for me. First of all, Crozier went out of business. I mean, they never recovered. And that's pretty monumental. It should be really a but every security person around Philadelphia knew that Crozier was severely underinvested in security. It was no surprise to anybody that that hospital system was egregious with its control systems. But it was no surprise to anybody. And what's terrible is that the community could know that you have an egregious healthcare organization with lack of controls, and there's still nothing that's really being applied, the application of it doesn't get done, right? And I know you see this also. And people think it's fear mongering, but then you have a whole hospital system goes down. By the way, it was a tier 1 trauma center.
Wow.
And a cascade, because in that case, it wasn't DDoS, it was ransomware.
Yeah.
All the other hospitals were scared. You come shop with your disk for imaging, and the other hospitals are like, we don't really want to plug that disk into our
Bingo.
environment.
I mean, it's we're in here for a great cause, and we're talking about things that are truly impactful. But you have to ask: is it a losing battle? For an example, as we talk about what just happened in February as well of this year with Change Health and United Health Group in the States, severe a ransomware attack. They paid it. I mean, this thing cascaded. It cost billions of dollars, and it's still ongoing. However, 4 weeks after the breach and them paying the ransomware, their stock went up. So is it fear? How do we win this battle? Because again, you just suffered one of the largest healthcare breaches ever, and your stock actually goes up.
And they had to pay twice, right?
That's right.
Affiliate never got paid.
They paid twice, right? So we can look at this as a losing battle, but we're in it for a great cause because we're passionate about this. So going back to how do we get the messaging out? I think we've certainly in the U.S., we need that regulatory body to actually enforce these things. We need funding, and that certainly can happen. Just like there's funding that went on with these conflicts that's going around the globe, we can actually fund organizations, and they're doing that right now in healthcare. There's a minimum amount of standards that they've come up with, and they're going to start enforcing that moving forward. So as we go back to look at here, we talked about AI and machine learning yesterday. Once again, great panel to close it out. You see that being weaponized now. For all of the good that AI is doing, we know the bad guys are going to take advantage of it, and they certainly are doing that right now. And as already been mentioned, the complexity of these attacks. They're not going to go away. They're going to continue to hunt and find ways to probe our systems. So this is an ever-evolving threat landscape. So these are the things that we look at for DDoS that's on the horizon and is here to stay. And this obviously will change again. This will change again as they adapt and change their tactics. We need to make sure we're trying to stay in lockstep or ahead of these threats that are going out there. So if you're not on the dark web, if you don't have someone that's looking at the chatter that is going on from these threat actors, you absolutely need to do that. If you're a cookie cutter in your program where you're just doing light testing, and yes, you want to stay ethical, but you need people who are hardcore, who are on these dark channels, understanding what's coming, how they're sharing their data to adapt your systems and your controls to stay ahead of this threat that's out there. Next slide. Shameless plug there. Carl kind of mentioned it, just some of the accolades here, 2023. As some of the people said, I don't like my face. Need a bigger screen?
You look angry in the top right. Somebody made you mad.
So thank you guys. I really enjoyed the conversation. Got a question? A question somewhere? Photo? Get in front of that?
Don't make the anger face.
Anger face?
We need a Corero.
Yes, yes. All right, folks. Are there any more questions, comments, concerns? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.